Hey there, it's your career insider, Sindy Thomas. Welcome to Season 3 of the Insiders Career Club podcast, where industry professionals share the inside, and I've got that in air quotes, scoop on their careers. Listeners know that I'm an HR career professional who's been in TA for over 25 years. But did you also know that I coach clients and help them plan and grow their careers, manage career transitions, help refine your interviewing skills, or I can help you work on a job search strategy? Now, have you been passed over for a promotion or a raise? Maybe you're frustrated because you're interviewing but not getting the job offer. If that's happened to you, let me help you get back on track. Sign up for a free coaching call today with me at insiderscareerclub.com. Remember, it's possible for you to have a great and a fulfilling career. Let's get you the career you deserve. Now, don't go anywhere. Up next is a great podcast. Stay tuned. Hey, insiders, it's Sindy Thomas, your career insider. And today's guest is David Hollenbach. He's the author of Fireproof, your grand strategy for transforming failure into fuel for your future. He's an international best-selling author, a motivational speaker, coach, and a mentor. He owns and operates David Hollenbach Consulting and has a podcast that he hosts, From Embers to Excellence. In the fire service, in his 23-year career, he advanced from firefighter up to Battalion Chief and Chief of Special Ops, and so much more. Let's learn more about his great career and welcome him into the show. Dave, good morning, and thank you so much for joining the Insiders Career Club podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm looking forward to our call. I've got lots of wonderful questions that I think will make for a really good show today. Let's start with you leaving the military and transitioning into being a firefighter. How difficult was that transition into civilian life?
When I joined the Navy, enlisted when I was 18, I turned 19 in boot camp. I went to A school. I got in with a medical waiver because in high school I broke my right tibia and almost lost my leg due to compartment syndrome, and I had some screws in there. And another injury led to me having the hardware removed, which allowed me to join the Navy. But I had to sign paperwork that basically said if I re-injured my leg, they wouldn't be responsible. So I broke my leg again in A school. I was going to school to become a gas turbine mechanic. I graduated that school, second in my class, was looking forward to a long career. But when I went to do my overseas screening to ship out to Yokosuka, Japan, the doctor said, no, we're going to go ahead and separate you. So I ended up with a medical separation, a medical discharge. I went home. I struggled with that. I hedged all bets on a nice long career in the Navy and ended up getting shipped home after only 14 months of service. It did take me a little while to get back on my feet. I actually did quite a bit of construction, concrete work, just hard manual labor in the Florida sun. It was enough to motivate me to go back to school. And I grew up in the fire service. My dad was a career firefighter.
Okay.
And he moved from the operations side of firefighting into fire investigations, and then from the municipal fire department that he was with, he ended up going into the law enforcement arm of the state fire marshal's office doing arson investigations. And I knew my dad as a firefighter and as a fire investigator, and it was a fairly easy transition going into the fire service. There's experiences that veterans have when they leave the military that are much different than what I experienced. So it's hard to make that comparison to like my
As what
experience.
some other people are going to have gone through or
Yeah,
will face. Okay, I got it. So talk to us a little bit about the skills, the talents, the personal qualities that are necessary for being a firefighter.
well, people from all walks of life go into the fire service, and
Mhm.
some have some fantasies about what it is to be a firefighter. And I had my own going into it, and I grew up in the fire service. It is a challenging career. It can be very rewarding as well. It is a life of service, and to really get the most out of it, you have to enter into it with that mindset of, you're going into this to help people. It's about them. It's not about you. You have to have the mindset that you are taking on a leadership role. I don't care if it's your first day on the fire truck. If you go into a commercial building and tell people that they need to get out right now, they're going to listen to you just because of that uniform recognition. And when you take on that role, when you take on that responsibility, it's a very serious obligation. You're representing firefighters from all over the world.
And so when you say that a lot of people have misconceptions about what the role is or position is, are you speaking about having a hero complex?
There are times in my career where I really thought that I'd be making more money than I
Mhm.
did. I mean, I never went into it thinking that I was going to get rich or anything like that, but I wasn't clear just how little money I was going to make.
Well, for
uh,
the amount of sacrifice, right?
yeah. And you'll see most firefighters have side jobs. I
Mm.
always had a second job.
Would you share some of the positions that you had?
So I started off as a volunteer, really to get some experience. I was already an EMT. I had gone to EMT school and got my certification,
Hmm.
and then went to work as a volunteer firefighter. And I had to take a couple of classes to where they would allow me to wear bunker gear and be able to fight fire. But I didn't have my state certification. I went to school for that. And once I got the state certification, I had a much higher level of training and I was able to apply for a full time position. I was in great shape. I scored well on all my tests. And when
Hmm.
I applied, there is a testing process that you have to go through. There's the physical and, there's a psychological aspect to it. And, your aptitude, your ability to learn and retain information. And so there's a written test, physical test, and a psychological test. And once you get through that process, there's an interview. A lot of departments do it the same way, but there's some that would do a panel interview or just a fire chief interview.
Mm.
Um, Once I got hired on, there's typically a 1 year probationary period. When you get hired, you go through an orientation process that is kind of like a boot camp where you learn a lot of the policies and procedures, how the fire department operates, what the chain of command, the different resources available, and the rules and regulations. And I want to say my orientation program was like 8 weeks, and then after that 8 weeks, they gave us a probationary, like a proby book is what they called it,
Hmm.
and it had all of these skills that we had to demonstrate throughout our first 12 months of employment out in the field. It was usually the company officer would sign us off. Stuff like advancing a hose line, how to operate the different fire extinguishers,
Okay.
how to don and doff your gear and your air pack, and equipment maintenance, all that kind of stuff. And then after that year probation, then you're a full-fledged firefighter. And they usually have ways of differentiating. In the department I was with, when you're a probationary firefighter, you get like an orange helmet, or there's orange stickers or an orange shield on your helmet, something like that, something to let people know on the fire ground that that person may not have the same skills as the people that are wearing the normal helmet.
Yeah.
And to, to kind of look out for them.
Mm.
And, I spent probably 6 years as a firefighter, and I had been driving the fire truck. I had gotten signed off and certified to be able to drive the fire truck, and the driver is typically the one that operates the pump that flows the water through the hose.
Okay.
And so you have to have a firm grasp of hydraulics and friction loss and all of that stuff. And
so it's not as easy as it looks, Dave, huh? You just turn on the hose and that's it.
no, you've got to regulate the pressure, or you could really hurt somebody, or it could be an ineffective hose stream. So I got signed off to do that, and there was a financial incentive to that. Not a lot, but there's a greater responsibility, so they compensate you. And I really enjoyed driving the fire truck. Who wouldn't? It's also a rank. So I went through a promotional process, and, written and practical examination, and I scored really high. Somewhere around 400 people tested. I scored 5th in the department in that testing process. And so I got promoted, and then I started learning the next position, which is lieutenant. Some departments, it's a captain. It's just the company officer, that is in charge of the station for whatever, shift it is. And so I would, as the engineer, the driver, I started learning from my lieutenant how to be a lieutenant. Okay. Took the classes, got certified, and then started riding in that position when my lieutenant was on vacation or out sick. And then I went through that testing process and became a lieutenant, and served in that position for about 6 years, and then got promoted to Battalion Chief. Went directly into special operations, and served in that capacity for just under 3 years. And that was a pretty stressful position.
What exactly is special operations?
It typically consists of technical rescue types of training, rope rescue, public safety rescue diver. So being a scuba diver to affect water rescue operations, hazardous materials, confined space, structural collapse.
So basically anything that wasn't just straight firefighting as putting out the blaze and maybe rescue, just a simple, I don't know if any of them are simple, but rescue of like somebody that was in a burning building.
All firefighters have a level of training in all of those, but the level of training, when we talk about special operations, a bulk of the time they are training on very technical aspects of, those types of rescues. So there's specialized tools, specialized equipment, and specialized operations where it's all coordinated, and it's just to be as safe as possible and to be as effective as possible. You can only carry so many tools on a fire truck before it just becomes a little ridiculous. And so it's the operations that aren't that frequent, real high risk, but low frequency.
So let me ask you about the leadership, because you did go from being a firefighter to being a lieutenant, and then moved into being a battalion chief or chief of special operations. So all of those are leadership positions. And I know that just from speaking to you and then also reading a little bit about you, that positive leadership when you were working on your MBA can influence the culture of a large organization. What's your current philosophy on leadership? And were there any experiences that helped shape that leadership philosophy?
So when I got promoted to lieutenant, I had no formal leadership education or training.
Mm-hmm.
And I quickly felt out of place, like I was in over my head.
Mm-hmm.
I became, I got promoted and I got moved to a fire station where there was some senior people. And my driver had probably, I want to say like 12 or 14 years more time on the job than I did. And she had spent the bulk of her career in special operations. So then she had a level of training that was, far superior to mine. It was intimidating. And then there was
I'm sure.
just some really high speed, high performing firefighters at that station. And they had been together for several years. They knew each other, they worked well as a team. And here I am, I'm coming in, brand new lieutenant. Why in the world would they listen to me? And I had to figure out what my role was going to be, what the dynamics were going to be, because I had heard a lot of stories about officers coming into a new station and throwing their weight around and relying on position power. And that just wasn't me. I didn't ever want to be viewed like that. I had talked to a buddy of mine who was already an officer for a larger fire department, and he pointed me in the direction of a few books. That was really the start of a passion for leadership development. And I just consumed it like my life depended on it. I realized that what I was doing, and I also felt that as I'm growing as a leader, I wanted to share all of that with my crew, and they loved it. And it was preparing them for their next role. It really made us one of the highest performing teams in the department. I mean, it was pretty cool. When we received a lot of recognition, it really became clear that there was something different about us. And so I started sharing what I was learning with other crews, and the training division caught wind of it and asked me if I'd be willing to share what I was doing. And so I ended up putting together a leadership workshop that became a part of the officer development program for that department. And then I got into a position where I had some influence. The fire chief gave me a budget and directed me to develop a program that's, because I had ideas and I had laid it out. It should start on day one, that firefighters coming in on day one should understand that they have a role to play, and it's the role of a leader in the community. And slowly but surely develop those leadership skills so that when they are in a position to lead other firefighters, they're not questioning their abilities.
Right.
That they have that program got put into place, and it was fairly successful. Some great leaders came through that program. There were some issues, though. It was when I was in my master's degree program, because I really felt like, man, I need to focus on leadership. That's my jam. I'm good in that arena. And the more I can learn about it, the better I'll be. And I have this great interest in it. So it was fun for me. And that's when I started learning about emotional intelligence. And what was really interesting is a lot of the skills that I was teaching, because you can recognize weaknesses overall. There's areas of weakness in any organization, and to identify those sometimes can be difficult, but then other times it can be like staring you right in the face, like going, hey, you got to do something about this. And what it was communication skills, being empathetic, being able to develop relationships, the people that you're leading, and maintain them. Having a level of self-awareness that when you're giving direction, that people are receiving that information the way you intend.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're stepping out of line and people's body language indicates that, being aware of that and being able to take a look at yourself and go, okay, maybe I'm being a little special right now. Let me put myself in check. So
Yeah.
those skills, I did not realize that those are some key components of emotional intelligence. When I started learning and researching about emotional intelligence, I'm like, hey, these are like all the areas that I have been really trying to develop in these firefighters and these fire officers. And those were all the areas that, when evaluated, when people are evaluated for their emotional intelligence quotient, there's all these areas that are evaluated. And the areas that women tend to score much higher than men in were those areas that I was just talking about. It was like this huge epiphany for me. There's not a whole lot of women in the fire service. So then I needed some hard data, and I looked at the census numbers. And the 2010 census showed that paid firefighters in full-time firefighting organizations, not volunteer fire department, but full-time, certified firefighters operating, in shift work and getting paid for it, that workforce had a 3.7% percentage of women in the workforce, and the rest being men. And then when you compare that to other male-dominated occupations or organizations that were similar, like required the same kind of education, the same level of danger, shift work, or maybe it's dirty, like, iron workers or welders, law enforcement, military. Those numbers were upwards, 17% or higher.
Okay.
So it's a huge disparity. And when you would talk to, like, there's all these articles, where fire service leaders were interviewed as to why they thought that was. And some common misconceptions, some common beliefs were, that women just physiologically were not built the same as men, and, just tended to shy away from that kind of work, which is BS. And they just didn't want to do it. It's just not, it's not an attractive career field for women. None of these misconceptions were supported, with evidence. And when you really looked at it, everything pointed to the culture was not an inclusive culture. People need to feel valued in an organization to make that choice to stay. And if you don't feel valued, you'll go somewhere where you are.
Absolutely.
And the fire service has done a really great job of recruiting and hiring more women. They've adjusted standards, not to make it easier or more difficult or whatever, but being more job specific to the physical requirements. And so there's like functional fitness requirements. So you're demonstrating your ability to do the different tasks that a firefighter would do when you're being tested. And when it can be shown that these are job specific abilities, and there's a level of ability that's required to do the job.
And if you can do that, then you can do the job.
Right. And so they were able to go, okay, well, now we can hire more women. Clearly they can do the job. And I've worked with a ton of amazing women that are just badasses. They can work circles around a lot of the men, because a lot of the job is stamina. Just because you can throw your body into a wall and knock it down doesn't mean that you're the best firefighter or the best person for the job.
Right.
I feel like in this day and age, intelligence goes much further than brawn. And the problem is, people feel like the testing was definitely discriminatory, but I think the mindset was different, where the physical abilities were valued more than a person's ability to lead or to perform critical thinking oriented
Mhm.
tasks,
So it
And
was
there's,
too much weighted on one side, maybe of strength,
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
rather than just the overall
Yeah. And
intelligence of
even,
the individual and experience to be able to
right,
do the job.
even then, you need to do some mentoring prior to actually doing the selection. So you mentor people and then you help them get through the hiring process. They make a much better probationary firefighter, and they're at a higher level than previous generations of firefighters, and they're able to learn faster because they're already geared up for the role.
To hear that in order to help women, get past the hiring process or the test or whatever, they had mentors. And to have a mentor does a whole lot for you. Kind of gives you an inside track to start with, right? But it also has a different level of support in that you feel supported emotionally. There's somebody you can talk to. There's somebody you can ask questions of, and you are not in an arena where you're going to be judged by it. It just kind of bolsters your faith in yourself. And I think that was a really wise thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And the departments that have implemented that practice are more successful in hiring women and hiring better candidates overall. The problem is that even though the fire service is doing such a great job in hiring more women, the retention is not what it should be. And this is indicated by the 2020 census numbers that showed there was only a 1% increase in full-time female firefighters. So it went from 3.7 to 4.7
Oh, wow. That's a
in
lot.
10 years. In 10 years. Women in all walks of life
Mhm.
in male dominated organizations experience a lot of the same.
Yes.
Um, I have a 16-year-old daughter. After she was born, I started recognizing, oh, my daughter might decide to go into the fire service.
Mm.
And early on in my career, I mean, I was just like any other knucklehead that thought there was something special about me because I could do this super masculine job. I'm super tough. And there was a handful of women on the department at that time, and not all of them seemed to be all that great. There were some that were really good, and then
Mhm.
others that weren't. The thing is that you have it in your head because of conditioning or whatever that women don't belong in the fire service.
Right.
The women that really do a great job, well, they're the exception. I said some ignorant things around a really good friend of mine who was a senior female firefighter and like, helped me become a better firefighter. And, in my mind, she was the exception. And one day she pulled me to the side and tuned me up pretty good. And it became clear to me that I had been forming opinions from a place of ignorance. And thankfully, I had somebody like her cared enough to pull me to the side and tell me that I was wrong and
Mhm.
enlighten me. And I'm better for it. But there was a lot of growth that had to happen in between that at the beginning of my career to when my daughter was born, and then starting to think that, my daughter might want to do this one day and I
Mhm.
don't want this for her.
Well, kudos to you for listening to your friend, taking it to heart, and putting in the work to grow and change your mindset, because not everybody does that. And they can be so siloed and their thinking so closed off that they don't even realize the opinions that they have need to be adjusted, need to be broadened and open. So kudos to you.
There's one thing that I'd like to say about men in male dominated organizations that have the knowledge and aren't ignorant to the fact that gender or skin color does not determine a person's ability to do a job well. I've seen way more men suck at being a firefighter than I've seen women that aren't that good at it. So, and it's just by virtue of numbers, but you can't label somebody or label a gender ineffective because you saw a couple not do that great of a job. And most likely, had they had some good mentorship and some good leadership, they would have been performing at a much higher level. It takes, especially in male-dominated organizations, it takes brave men to stand up against other men that are acting like idiots and say, this is unacceptable behavior. I look back and I know there's other men out there listening right now that feel like they let their sisters down because they didn't speak up when they had an opportunity to. And so I would challenge the men out there to be better advocates for the women in their organization. And it's just going to make the organization stronger and develop the teams to a whole other level.
Absolutely. And I say here to that. I agree and encourage anyone listening that is in a position of power to sit back and evaluate what's going on within your organization. Who do you have on your teams that could be nurtured and developed further? And a couple of years ago, probably 2019, there was a lot of discussion with regard to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of companies made pledges about what they were going to do to change the employee populations within their companies, as well as far as bringing people in. And they may have done that, but it can't stop there. It has to be an ongoing thought. And you bring people into an organization, you make a way for them, you nurture them, you mentor them, and you give them opportunities to learn and to grow so that they can get to those next levels. And if you have the power to do that, it has to come from the top down, and you have to encourage the people above you or sitting on either side of you to do that.
Amen.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
Well, it really, because I wrote an article for Fire Engineering Magazine about the importance of having more women in the fire service and how the culture needs to change. And digging into the research of culture change in a large organization, I pulled out a book that had been recommended to me. It's Leading Change by John Cotter. And it really lays out the steps to change a culture. And like you said, it's got to come from the top. And the person that is ultimately responsible for the organization is ultimately responsible for the culture that is, if you're willing to accept a certain culture, then, that's on you. And the person at the top is the one that should take responsibility for that. And that person at the top needs to select the right people to work on either side of them to really bring that message out to the organization and make that change for the better.
And to continually reinforce, because you can throw an idea out there. We're going to do this. You put things in place. People go off and, they're leading the charge with what they've been assigned. But then somewhere along the way, when some kind of emergency, some big, let's say you're working for an organization that, sells big products, and all of a sudden you've got some big implementation or something to do, it can get pushed off to the wayside. So you have to keep checking back in on those goals and initiatives and make sure that it's continually being reinforced and looking at your numbers across the board. How many women do you have in your management? Where are they? Are they senior managers? Are they directors? Or are they at the topper echelons in your organizations where there are senior directors, VPs, executive directors, and beyond, chiefs of department or head of department? So, you kind of look at that, and are they taking the time to develop these people? and give them opportunities that will round them out so they can go to the next level. It's more than just hiring. It's a whole program and a philosophy about the way you bring people in and nurture them along the way. And it only is going to make your company better, because it's been proven that the more diversity you have within your company, your bottom line is much higher than companies that aren't diverse.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. The constant checking in, circling back. In large organizations, you really should have performance measures in place to be able to measure the change that's occurring and the benefits of it. And are the changes that you're making effective in your ultimate goal of changing the culture? And once that culture change occurs, what are the benefits that you're experiencing?
Hold people accountable for making those things happen. That's the other piece. You can keep checking back in, but if you don't hold the people accountable, they aren't, and very often, a lot of cases, going to do it. So if you know you're being held accountable, you'll do it, because you know you're going to have to answer for it.
Not holding people accountable isn't fair to the people that are doing the job.
Absolutely. Because if you're on the opposite end and somebody's giving you a directive and you go do it, and then they never check back in, they never ask how it came out. They never asked how you're doing or, what effect it had. You're like, why did I do this? How did you reset yourself to decide to want to be an author, a coach, a motivational speaker, and a mentor?
Well, through my leadership roles in the fire service, I had already been coaching and mentoring, and not necessarily people that I was leading, but coaching and mentoring people in other organizations, mostly in the fire service, but there was men and women in law enforcement as well that I was working with. And it just seemed like a natural thing. Once I left the fire department, which, that was not my plan. I had planned on staying in the fire service for much longer. I was struggling with PTSD. I spent most of my career in the busiest firehouses, which, really meant that I was in some of the rougher neighborhoods in the county, and, seeing a lot of violent crime, and just, there was, industrial accidents where you see how human body can break in some really severe ways. And, that stuff sticks with you. And I did not get the help that I needed early on, and I suffered. In my personal life, I was struggling, and it had a negative impact on my professional career. I ended up leaving. I had enough time to retire. And that is really when I had been writing a book for probably 10 years. It was a leadership book. It was supposed to be a leadership textbook, for people to use in the classroom or, within an organization to really develop their leaders throughout the hiring process to, professional development into promotions and stuff. So that changed as I evolved. So did the chapters in my book. And then when I left the fire service and had this identity crisis, because for 23 years, that was my identity.
Right.
I didn't see myself in any other way than a leader in the fire service. That was who I was. And when that went away, I went to a really dark place. And I, it was best for me to leave when I did, even though I didn't want to. It really was the best for my mental health and for my family. And so when I left, I got the help that I needed. And I went back to my book, because part of the healing for me was really going back to that age-old question. You've got to know thyself. All the way back to ancient Greece, the oracle at Delphi, the main pillar in the temple, at the top of it was engraved, know thyself. So as far back as then, people were pretty clear on the importance of really knowing who you are at your core, and how that affects your life moving forward. And, I had spent most of my life not knowing who I truly was. And so I took that time and dug deep and really just kept on asking myself that question and discovered my purpose. And there was all these tools that I use to help me determine all of that. And felt it was important to share that. I put it all in my book, Fireproof. And I shared some really personal stories. A lot of my growth came from mistakes that I had made. It came from really poor decisions that I made. Those lessons that I learned through that, I mean, I don't want people to make the same mistakes as I did, but I also want people to learn the way they learn best. And if that means, falling on your face, then so be it. But I want to have examples or, be able to be an example of hey, look, if you fall on your face, that's not the end. You don't have to allow this experience to define you. You can use this experience to refine yourself, to make yourself better. And if I can't get people to avoid the same mistakes, at least I could be there and give them a hand up and dust them off and encourage them to keep pushing forward, because now that they've gone through that, they're better for it. And they are going to be able to add another layer of value to the people that they're leading. That's the value in the mistakes that we make, if we allow it to be a valuable experience. And
look for the ways, look to see what you can learn from it, because there is a learning. There's something in there that's key to you moving forward. So if you can be open, look into it, think about it, and use that to propel you forward, it's like you say, you'll only be better for it. Can you share a little bit more with us about your book, where people can find it, and how can they reach out to you if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, you can find my book. Again, it's Fireproof, Your Grand Strategy for Transforming Failure into Fuel for Your Future. I know it's a mouthful, but believe me, that title got whittled down a little bit, actually. So, you can find it on my website. You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, really any online bookstore. I know it's available, Target, Walmart, even some stores that I've never heard of before that's available there.
Well, what we'll do is, we'll put it in the notes for the podcast so that they have the full title and your website as well. I'll include that. It'll make it easier to find you.
My website's hollenbachleadership.com. You can go there. There's links on the main page to my book. Also, I've got some free downloads. One of those free downloads is the workbook that goes with my book. And it just gives some extra tools to go along with the steps in the book. And all of my social media links are on my website. So please reach out, especially, if you're in a place professionally that you think that maybe you'd like to get a little bit better, become a better leader, a better mentor, a better person. I'd love to have, a free call with you and see if there's anything I can do to help you.
Right. Sounds good. Well, Dave, it's been my pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you for sharing all that you've shared with us. And I'm going to wish you a great rest of the day.
Yeah, likewise.
And a happy Thanksgiving, because it's coming up.
Yeah. You too. Yeah. Happy holidays, and have a great weekend. I really appreciate you taking the time with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Take care now.
All right. You too.
Thanks for listening, and your support's a blessing. If you enjoyed the podcast, give us a positive rating on Apple. It will help our podcast ranking on all the major sites like Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. We release new podcasts every 2 weeks on the first and third Wednesdays. Now your support is needed. Keep listening and share these career-changing podcasts with your friends, your family, your coworkers, and anyone else you feel it will bless. In addition to the major sites, they can also find these podcasts on my website at insiderscareerclub.com. Now, if you're not happy with your career, Let me help you. I can help you get your career on track. Sign up for a free coaching call with me today. Before you go, let's speak victory over you. You have a bright future. Good breaks are looking for you, and new doors are about to swing wide open with opportunity. Believe it. Until next time, take care.